All right. Hey, everybody. Everybody can see me and hear me okay? All right. Justin, you can join whenever you'd like. Give it another minute or so. Let people who are straggling in to join us. Hey, Justin. All right. So we got a great attendance tonight. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Joseph Carr, the Director of Artist Development and Youth Film with Indie Memphis. I am one of the programmers of Shoot and Splice, along with Justin Thompson here of Crosstown Arts. Really excited to bring our Shoot and Splice with Craig Brewer to you all tonight. Normally, of course, we host these at the first Tuesday of every month at the Crosstown Theater. But of course, over the last year almost now, it's almost been a full year, we've been doing these virtually. And it's really been awesome, like how much our community continues to support us and joining us on these virtual Shoot and Splices. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. Yeah, before we start, I just want to thank our Shoot and Splice sponsors. They are Mark Jones, Firefly Grip and Electric, LensRentals.com, Music and Art Studio, and Via Productions. Those sponsors are also our in-kind sponsors of our Indie Grants program. Indie Grants is our filmmaker grant program in which we provide cash and in-kind services to 3 different Memphis-based filmmakers to produce short films. Applications for the 2021 round will open soon, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we do have a new filmmaking grant opportunity that's open right now. It's the Women's Short Film Grant, in which one woman filmmaker from Memphis or surrounding counties will receive $5,000 to produce a new short film. So if you are interested in learning more about that grant, head to indiememphis.com, check under the artist development tab there, and you'll see the link to the page. I'll also drop the link in the chat box once I'm done with the introductions here. We also, as always, are excited to provide you all with our Indie Memphis Virtual Cinema, which provides weekly virtual screening opportunities for brand new films and classics. And as always, we have a great number of films for you to watch right now, including Test Pattern and Night of the Kings, both of which are getting absolute rave reviews across the board. So please check those out. If you're an Indie Memphis member, you probably have some ticket credits you can use. So just head over to indiememphis.org, take a look at that and log into your account and see how to use your credits to watch those films. And if you're not a Indie Memphis member, you should become one. It's $50 a year, and you immediately get 5 credits for watching films throughout the year. So it kind of pays for itself right there. Okay, so how this evening will work is Justin Thompson here will be hosting a conversation with our guest, Mr. Craig Brewer. And they're going to chat for a while. And then once the audience Q&A portion begins, please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you're watching this on our simulcast, either on YouTube or Eventive, just enter your questions in the chat boxes there, and those will be forwarded along to me to read to Mr. Brewer. All right, so at this time, I'd like to go ahead and just introduce who's right here with us right now anyway, the Director of Film and Video Production at Crosstown Arts, Mr. Justin Thompson, to take it away.
Hey, so really just excited to have director, writer, and producer Craig Brewer with us tonight. I just want to say, Craig, if you want to go ahead and come on, you can. But just say, Craig has very graciously over time offered to help us Shoot and Splice. I'll see him in the hall and he's like, if y'all ever need any help, let me know. And so we were talking about this month and I said, well, maybe Craig could do it. And he has this movie coming out, so he probably would be too busy, but let's just try. And like in 60 seconds, Craig emailed us back and said like, yeah, I'd love to do it. So thank you so much for, I'm sure you're super busy, being willing to come and talk to us. So thanks.
I'm happy to do it. Happy to be here.
So let's just dive in. This is and be as technical as you'd like to be. I guess the first question I want to ask is, I know coming to America, you had pretty much finished shooting before the pandemic,
right?
And then the pandemic started in March, and you were had you started post or you were getting into post? And I guess just tell us about that process. And like I said, be as technical as you want to be. Get nerdy.
Well, we had finished principal photography, and we knew that we probably were going to need a couple of more days of photography, and we were thinking that those would be in New York. And the way that major studios handle, editorial and reshoots is that it's much more of a thing. It's not like I've never had to do like a new scenes or anything like that. But in bigger movies, they see what you have first, and so you do what's called the director's edit. And I finished that, and it was in pretty good shape, but we still had a lot of work to do on it. And we were planning on doing a couple of additional scenes in New York, to catch skylines and do all that kind of stuff that we didn't do before. And then in March, obviously everything changed. And so there was kind of like two things that were happening kind of simultaneous. One was, how do we actually edit, and how do we score, when people can't even be in the same room? And how do we not only how do we do all these things, how do we test the movie? And as much as I hate the process of testing, because it's just, it's kind of like your kids are in a beauty pageant, and you raise everybody's hand, and the first question to everybody is like, who thought this child was ugly? Anybody? Raise your hand, how many people here thought this child was ugly? Why do you think the child was ugly? And you learn a lot of the movie. You learn what's working, and you learn what's not working. But usually with a comedy or any movie that I've done, you've got a packed theater. So how do you even know if jokes are working and all that kind of stuff, unless there's people in the audience doing it? So, and I'm sure there's people that are watching, or that are part of the filmmaking community, that all kind of went through their various, stages of how to keep working during a pandemic. So we were on a thing called Evercast. I believe that's what it is, which is essentially like a Zoom where one of the boxes is the Avid out. So we could watch the movie or watch the edit in real time, and my editors were even like my main editor and the assistant editor, they weren't even in the same room. They were the effects supervisor, the graphics team, everybody then just went home. Paramount, just like all studios, just shut down and sent everybody home, but we still had to meet these deadlines. And yes, the deadlines got extended because, as everybody's, I'm sure, finding when this first was breaking out, that there was kind of an adjustment, and things just, especially with editorial, they took a lot longer. I mean, I learned some key things from it, things that I'm probably not going to let go, and I might take into future films. And I'm sure there's a lot of filmmakers and editors that are thinking the same things. But what, for instance, I'll tell you, like, a big thing that I did learn is that I think that when I could do my usual process, I probably got a little bit too indulgent with, I'm trying to swear less, everyone, but there is a term that editors and directors use. So if you'll maybe afford me this one F word, but it's called frame fucking, where you really can just be like, can I see that again? Can you like just take 2 frames off of that and move it to the end? Okay, yeah, play it again. Okay, how about this? How about you move it over 3 frames, and let's kind of roll it within the clip so it begins later, but it's still hit. Yeah, one more time. That's that term. You're overdoing something that should be done in layers. And what I think I learned was, it was a better process for me to allow the whole movie to lay out, and not be in the room, and not be there constantly coming in with like, oh, wait a minute, could you stop for a minute? Let me back up and do this. I had to write down what I thought. I had to like go like, this and this after I've seen it. Like, they would have to take the whole edit, they'd have to print it, and then post it up on Pix, which is a service for filmmakers to see both dailies and edits. And then I would see the whole movie, and I would have to make notes that night. And then I would send it to the editorial team, and then they would work on those notes. And then I would see those notes after they worked on it that day or that couple of days, and then reprint it back to Pix, which was time consuming. And then I had to, I had to do the notes again. But what I found was a lot of those moments that I probably would have overdone. Sometimes those moments were cut, and I probably would have messed with it too much as opposed to this process. So, and then I said there was kind of two fronts of this. One was trying to finish the movie under these rather extreme circumstances. Not to mention we're all terrified and we're all just wondering, like, what's the world going through? Like there's truly like the emotional part of it, of like what the human being is going through. Then there's the technical part of like what we're doing. But the bigger avenue was like, well, when is this movie coming out? Because we were scheduled for August of 2020. And then by March, that was like, well, that's not happening. I don't think that the world is going to be open for theaters. So it's like, okay, you're going to be Christmas 2020. And so we started, there's probably about a dozen of those big studio movies that were in this particular predicament. They were supposed to come out in that year, but more and more they started getting kicked down the curb, so to speak. And then there was a moment where it's like we really began to question, like, can this movie even come out for Christmas 2020? And no one is more blindly optimistic than movie people, especially at a studio where they're saying like, no, this is all going to be fixed, and surely people are going to come back to the theaters. But more and more, it just became apparent that it just wasn't going to happen. So when it was going to come out also affected, well, when did we have to have the edit done? Because there's some things that we needed, and how are we going to do like these two moments that we said we were going to move to the reshoot state? And so then there came the day where it's like, okay, we're ready for these two reshoots. And one of it's going to be in New York and the other one's going to be on the Paramount lot. And I was going to have to do basically 3 days of shooting. And 2 of them was on the Paramount lot under the strictest COVID restrictions that I've seen, barring being a frontline, nurse on this or doctor, and I'm sure some people have been in this, but like now they have like different colored tiers. I think that if you're in the green, you get a green wristband, and that means that you could talk to the actors, you could be where the cameramen were and where the director of photography was, but everybody else had to go away. So they'd say, okay, yellow team now can come in. And then so green team would go away, and yellow team would be like your grips and your gaffers and everybody like lighting the set. And then they would have to go away. And then a cleaning crew would come in, clean everything. And then the green team would have to come in. And this is after we've had daily testing and luckily we didn't have any problems on our set, but some people would on other shows did. And that's an automatic shutdown, automatic wait 10 days. So it's just like the whole industry was learning how to deal with this in real time. But on my 3rd day of shooting, I had to shoot things that were happening in New York, but I couldn't be there. So I had a whole Zoom virtual setup and, a whole way that I could talk to the actors and I have a crew in New York that's filming and I'm not even there to film it. So
how'd you feel about that? That seems like it'd be really hard as a director to not actually be there.
It was, but it's kind of like that editorial thing. It's like, I bet if I was there, I may have messed with it too much. Maybe I just needed to be a little bit more, clear with what I wanted, and that's kind of what happened. But it was, everyone has been learning how to do it. But then it came time to like really really get into, okay, how are we going to test the movie? And the first time we tested the movie, it was a nightmare. It was just the worst. And I don't mean like our scores were low. That's not what I mean, because they actually were good. We did learn a lot and do a lot of restructuring and everything. But what it was a, usually what a testing for these movies is that you watch everybody in the theater, and then at the end of the movie that you're testing, they all have like these forms that they fill out. And then the forms are collected. They now do it with iPads, and it's very quick and efficient. But you fill out these forms. Who was your favorite character? When did the movie feel like it had pace all these kind of like questions. And then it gets tabulated by this service that then makes a whole presentation to the studio and to the filmmaking team as to what the audience thought. But then they do a focus group where they take 20 people out of this group of 300. And they're in the front 2 rows, and they have a person that's basically doing like a real good focus group. Like, well, what did you get out of this movie? Where did you think it could be improved? Like, and you're hearing all of this, but what we had to do was we had to do it with basically kind of like a new Zoom setup where everybody knew that they were being watched by Paramount. They first of all had to sign their life away that they wouldn't divulge any secrets of the movie and anything like that. But the viewers were basically watching my movie on their laptop. And knowing that the studio is watching them watch it, because they don't want to have anybody, with their phones like videoing it or anything like that. But what that means for me is that I'm watching 300 people like, watching your movie, and probably about 10 minutes in, a majority of them forgot that they were being like watched. And I don't know about anybody's Zoom etiquette that's been happening, but every once in a while, you just got to remind yourself, like, just remember, I'm on television to everybody that I'm in this Zoom with. So people are like, if like they got a call, and watching the movie, they're maybe they're like scratching themselves. Like it was just awful to watch the way people watch movies on a laptop. As a matter of fact, I did one, and then Lee Daniels did one for United States, and for his movie. And I remember getting on the phone with him, and I was just like, how did you feel about that? And he's like, oh, I am not doing that again. he was just like, the hell with that. I mean, that was just awful. But the focus group was kind of great, because nobody was like doing this thing that happens where they're in the room and they're kind of competing with each other in this weird way. You were seeing their faces. They were really thoughtful. And I think that actually I preferred that part of it. So I almost would prefer to like have a theatrical experience, but then have like a focus group like this. And so it was very difficult to do. But then more and more, we started finding that it was actually rather helpful. That, I thought that it would be a big detriment to the movie. Like, you want to show it with the best foot forward. But people understood, like, it's a work in progress, and they were actually really, really helpful. And the whole process made the movie better.
So I understand with the pandemic and how you said that distance is helpful because you sort of were able to not get so deep into it. But pre-pandemic and post, how, like, as the director, how often did you sit in the room with the editor or sit with the composer? I mean, I know, because I'm in a band with someone who's composed many of your scores, that, I mean, I know you're there in it.
Yeah.
So how much compared to now?
I mean, every day I'm in there with my editor. It's my favorite part of the process, because you're having to rethink your whole movie. They always say that there's kind of like 3 stages. It's like you write the script, and then you rewrite it when you shoot it, and you rewrite it when you cut it together. And that's where I find that you can get really creative. You find that you can really get in the weeds sometimes, and you need to completely try things out. I mean, I'll never forget this time that I Hustle and Flow, we hit this spot where I was just really depressed. I mean, I remember, just being really depressed, because there's basically 3 songs in Hustle and Flow. There's Whoop That Trick, there's It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, and It Ain't Over. And by the time you got to It Ain't Over, it was kind of like you know how like when you're watching Christmas Carol and you're kind of like, all right, so when's that third ghost gonna come around? You know, okay, we saw we saw past, we saw present. Bring on the future. Let's get on with this movie. There was a little bit of that feeling like, oh man, we're kind of going into this song and we don't, and it just feels like the other two. What are we going to do? And I was driving home and depressed. I'll admit to everybody, I pulled over on the side of Olympic Boulevard and sobbed, totally crying, like I've totally fucked up my movie. And then John Singleton, rest his soul, big brother, he called me up and he was like, Purple Rain is on DVD. It's got a whole new commentary, man. You got to go watch it tonight. And I'm like, I can't watch anything tonight. I want to hang myself. I want to kill myself. I can't, the end of the movie isn't working. He's like, oh, come on, man. It's a process. It's the process. I mean, you just got to go to sleep. You got to get inspired. And then you go at it again. Every day you just work at it. You try this, you try that, and everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And so I went back and I started watching Purple Rain, and which is, obviously to everybody here knows that this is a great movie and an incredible movie, and I'm not being facetious. But I saw something in it that totally gave me an idea. And that was when you're watching When Doves Cry in Purple Rain, and you're seeing scenes from when he took Apollonia to, purify ourselves in the Lake Minnetonka, and, but then you saw scenes that you didn't see. And I was like, oh, maybe that's what I need to do in the song of It Ain't Over. I need to maybe reboot what the third act is about. And I can go to these scenes that I didn't put in before, and I can restate it in this cool way. And so that's what the editorial process should be. But it usually has a little bit more flow to it. It was a little bit harder to do it in this way. But I did find that when I had those inspirational moments on Coming to America, I could call up my editors and say, essentially, I watched Purple Rain last night, and this is what the third act I think needs to be. The difference is the young man version of me had to sit next to my editor and go, yeah, that, no, move, that, try, okay, that didn't work, let's do it again. The grown-up me now is going like, everybody kind of get what I'm saying? Surprise me. I'll be over here. And then I come back the next day and I'm seeing things that I didn't expect, because it's really kind of like what I've learned about directing actors. Don't get over specific. Say things that are kind of like delightfully not vague, but let them interpret what you're saying, and you're going to get a better product. You can always do your frame thing later, but it was a much better experience for me, and led to, I think, a good movie.
So I want to talk, and I know you've been asked this a lot, and it's not like this is new to you, but you have this really beloved film, Coming to America, and you're making the sequel. So I guess just as a director, can you talk about getting into the headspace to take on something? I mean, that seems pretty weighty. I mean, a lot of people really love this, and you're being asked to deliver on a sequel. So I guess, how did you approach that?
With much difficulty. I think that the one thing that nobody really ever talks about with filmmaking is how much it mentally weighs on the people who make it. I've had anxiety a lot in my life. I've tried to kind of deal with it the best way I can, but there's nothing worse than having those moments of crippling doubt where you feel like you've let everybody down. It happens on the best of movies that people make. I mean, but the feeling never goes away. It's always going to creep in and be there at some point in the process. And I remember I'd go to bed at night sometimes just thinking of the movie, and I would see the scenes kind of like a Frank Capra calendar, all right, there's that scene, and then that scene, and that scene, and that scene, and that scene, that scene. Is that the way to do it? What if I removed, man, what if I cut out all those scenes and I just went that scene, that scene, that scene, that scene. So you go to sleep at night with this worry of, and then you wake up, and then you got to get into it again. Now you put onto it, the expectation of a beloved movie, and Coming to America is that. People love this movie. And it's not just like, oh, I love it because it's funny and it's entertaining. It means a lot. It means a lot to people because it was truly a groundbreaking movie. I try to explain to young people just what, first and foremost, like the explosion of Eddie Murphy was just in the 80s, just in general. It's really hard to explain to young people that because they've had the benefit of growing up with a lot of people who've been inspired by Eddie Murphy. But Eddie was just so different. Yes, there were comics like Pryor and Cosby and everything, but like, you know, no one was Eddie. Eddie was young. He was sexy. He was aggressive, but you loved him. Every single generation seemed to find him hilarious. You know, everybody was tuning into Saturday Night Live to see what he would do. And then his movies were mega hits. But Coming to America in particular was really kind of outside of it all because, and what I mean by outside of it is he really stepped into a different type of character. He wasn't really this kind of like wise talking guy. It was a fairy tale, you know, and it resonated globally. I don't know if it was just the kind of the you know, the immigrant experience of you know, coming to America, and America was like, you know, humorously, delightfully ugly American, you know, I mean, literally trash is being thrown out into the streets. But Akeem was kind of like, this place is wonderful. I want a mop. What's that? And they're throwing garbage out. What a country, you know? And so we as Americans kind of felt like, oh, it's kind of cool that he's finding that all hilarious. But the rest of the world embraced it. This is an all black cast, except for Louis Anderson. That was a global hit and really hadn't been equaled till Black Panther, to be straight with you. You know, I mean, so to know that, I think, was to be one of the first and foremost protectors of it. So I would look at certain elements in the script and say like, okay, it's really great that you guys are maybe doing we're trying to cram everything from the first one in this movie as a little homage here and there, but I think we got to maybe take some out and think about what the story is now. So Justin, we got kind of deep on Coming to America, and I don't mean that to like frighten everybody. The movie is very entertaining and very, very, very funny. But in order to make the movie, we had to think about Coming to America in this rather interesting way. So I remember we'd have these conversations like, well, what's the last line of Coming to America? Oh, well, it's Akeem and Lisa. They've just been married. They're in the chariot. And he says, so what say you? Do you want to go back to Queens? And Lisa goes, nah. And they're happily ever after, just like every fairy tale. And so then it asked the question like, well, what do you think they've been doing over these past 3 decades? Well, they've been having children. They have 3 children. Has Lisa gone back to Queens? I don't know. What if she hasn't? What if this woman who we meet her in the first movie and she was at a benefit, you know, she was helping. It was a, you know, I don't know if you remember, Randy Watson was there and everything, but it was like a benefit. She was a person that helped people, but now she's a queen, or now she's a princess, and now she's living in this kind of like fairy tale bubble of Zamunda. Same with Akeem. What are we going to do to disrupt it? You know, and so it started getting into questions of like, well, what were we doing 30 years ago? Well, I was 17 when I saw Coming to America. I now have 2 teenage kids. So I'm not the same guy, and neither is Akeem. And that's kind of an interesting element that this movie provides now. And so every day, both in working on the script and then shooting it, I kind of had to be like a little bit of a referee of like, okay, audiences that love Coming to America is going to love this and love this and love this. But do we need this? Because I don't know if we have room for it. And I would hope that our movie is more than just constant retreading over the old movie. And that's going into a practical way of getting into it. The emotional thing that I had to do, I think I just learned from doing Footloose, you know, that movies mean so much to people that it doesn't matter if you make something good, bad, or mediocre. They're going to get defensive about their movie, as they should. But one of the themes in the movie that we're exploring is you know, don't necessarily get intractable with the way things were. There might be some new ideas. There might and there might be new things that a new generation could embrace that will actually bring them closer to the kind of person you want to be. Like, it's important that a younger generation learns who Randy Watson is. It's very important. They need to watch the original, but they also need to see that, you know, there's an opportunity to do something new with some of these characters. So yes, I was very stressed, but I found that the work was something that I was inspired by, because I loved coming to America, and Eddie knew that I loved it, and everybody on the set also loved it and wanted to be there.
Just before we started, I was reading an interview talking about going kind of deep with you from today, some paper today, where you were talking about the costume designer and talking about the difference in design for the costumes here and then in Wakanda, and then like saying these are two imaginary places. We don't have to have like a huge fight about it. Like, is that sort of the level of how deep it got as far as talking?
It never got that way with Ruth, because luckily Ruth Carter, Academy Award winning Ruthie Carter, as I like to say. Yeah, what did I call her on set? AAW. Ruth Carter, AAW. She's like, what is AAW? That's 2 A's and a W. That's Academy Award winner. And she's like, oh, I want that to catch on. AAW. She did the costumes for Black Panther, and she was perfectly, you know, ready to do Zamunda. And she had a really good grasp on it. Where it started to get like, you know, us having like conversations was, we were not only kind of like battling with Wakanda, we were battling with 1988 Zamunda. And 1988 Zamunda, it brings questions like, okay, am I gonna have like the lion head that James Earl Jones kind of wrapped around Akeem now that he's king? Or is there another way to do it that doesn't hurt animals? And then it suddenly sparked a conversation that created such a cool costume design, where it became this big golden, you know, brooch. And then the set designer was always talking about like, well, do we want to like make the palace exactly the way it was? So we were constantly in this state of trying to kind of stand on the shoulders of John Landis and everybody else by being inspired by that world, but also saying like, we can't let people down. There has to be grandeur. There has to be this production value that the first movie had. But there were spirited conversations, you know.
So I want to ask sort of a philosophical question about, and I asked this of anybody who's had some success who lives here, and you've had great success. So you could live in LA or New York, and I know you don't live here all the time, right? Most of the time.
I have a place in Los Angeles, so I have, when I have to work there, then I go there.
So I mean, I guess what is it about Memphis that makes you kind of want to stick around? And I guess with the thought that, like, you know, to someone else who's a younger filmmaker who lives here and is like, there's no way I can do it here. I need to go to LA, or I need to go to New York, or I need to go to some other place. I mean, why stay here? What's the deal?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of two parts. I mean, I think the first part would be like, well, why should you be a filmmaker and be here in Memphis? And then I can speak to at least my side of it now, being someone that works elsewhere and chooses to live here. You know, I mean, this indie Memphis it's so interesting that indie Memphis and Crosstown are you know, it's doing this together, because it's like where it's the festival that basically I got my start in, and there was a whole community of us that really were waiting around to make something for the deadline of indie Memphis for next year. You know, there'd be like probably about 10 of us filmmakers, and we would go like, when's the deadline? And we would do math backwards to go like, okay, that means I would have to shoot something like next month. I'd have to have it cut, and then the deadline for submitting, and then we'll find out if we get in it or not. And that was something that Memphis really needed at the time. You know, this was not a YouTube culture back then. This wasn't where people could make movies on their phones. You know, we were all helping each other and all working and inspiring each other, sometimes competitively so, sometimes working on each other's crews. And also, Memphis was kind of a beautiful creative landscape that was not jaded about filmmaking, which I think Los Angeles gets to. You know, you can't just pull up to some street, on some curb and on Sunset and start filming. You know, there's going to be a cop is going to stop you and ask for your permit. I mean, I live here in Crosstown, but I think I've broken in here before and filmed like zombie apocalypse type of, shit. I'm sure there's been a couple of like Mike McCarthy-esque movies that have been shot, in where there's like a coffee shop right now. So that's what was always great about Memphis, is that, there was a scrappiness about the area that allowed you to be and try what you wanted to try without there necessarily being this criticism or weight on the project to turn a profit or to advance some production company or studio's agenda. You were just making things that you thought were cool, that you thought your friends thought were cool, and then you'd rent out the High Tone or you'd rent out a theater at Malco and have a premiere. So I think that there was that part of it that was always really special. And then for me, what I found is that when I started making films, I had a hard time really finding a community in Hollywood or in LA. It's not completely geared up for that, because part of what Los Angeles, or at least, let me not say Los Angeles, let me say Hollywood, that's just a concept. That Hollywood is a place where you have lunch with somebody and you have to basically divide it into 3 parts. The first part is quick little chit chat, getting to know this person that you're having lunch with. Then you get to eat in the second part while they're talking. And then you have to finish your lunch, but so you can start saying something and then they can start eating. So you're not really having lunch with somebody. You're having a meeting that happens to be at lunch. Now, that's a very vague way of looking at people. I've got really good friends in Hollywood and in Los Angeles, and I love the place. It's really great. But it is not necessarily a place that I would say I have a community or that I'm part of a community. I like going to things around here. I like that when my movies come out here, friends come up to me and say they went and saw it. They are not sending out an email to me saying, congratulations. Wish the grosses were a little higher, but maybe the multiples in the second and third weekend will hold. Things could be worse. You're not dropping down to 67% viewership in the second weekend. And it's like, that's not what it used to be for me. It used to just be like, oh man, I saw your movie, it's cool. And even if they didn't like it, you weren't necessarily getting into math about it. You weren't getting into what it will mean. But I guess that's what it is. And and here's what's interesting is the pandemic has completely, I've gotten so many calls from friends in LA going like, so how have you been doing this? I was like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, how do you live somewhere else, but you're still working? Because we're finding that now that I'm in a writer's room and we're only doing things on Zoom, I don't know if I have to be in LA anymore. I could be anywhere. And I was like, well, I've been telling you that for like 15 years. But a lot of people, I understand why they need to move to a bigger market. But for me, I would argue that it's easier to find yourself here, both on a community level, on a family level, but more so, I mean, I look at coming to America And it isn't so far afield from me doing Coming to America after doing Hustle and Flow and Poor and Hungry here. Like I don't feel that, oh my God, it's so much different than anything else I've done. Yes, I've done bigger budgets, but you're still having to, yeah, I've done small budgets. I've done this. Now this is the biggest budget I've ever done, but you're still getting down to very fundamental things like, well, am I moving people? Am I entertaining people? You know, can the music come in a certain way? All the stuff that I had to do, you know, back in the day when I was cutting things together in my shotgun house over on Benton.
So sort of a continuation of that question, and hopefully not too controversial. Do you have any thoughts about what, you know, for a person who lives here, who wants to work on one of your movies or who wants to work on larger productions, like what needs to happen in Memphis and in Tennessee for, I mean, and I know we've been lucky in the past couple of years. I mean, there's a production happening right now in Mississippi and a little bit in Tennessee, but I mean, what holistically needs to happen so we can have more of that?
Now, why do you think that's controversial? I'm curious. What's
Well, because I mean, I guess there's to some degree there's politics, right? As far as like tax incentives and those sorts of things, and some people may be okay with that, and some people may not be.
Well, I mean, I think look, it's a couple of things, and I don't think it's as easy as just I understand what you mean by politics because you're right. There is a political element to it. Whenever I have advised anybody on when it comes to like the you know, the film industry here in Tennessee, you know, it's hard for me not to bring up Atlanta or Georgia because Georgia. I remember when Georgia began being Georgia in film. Like I remember when they started, you know, creating this huge incentive, and for at least 5 to 10 years after that, all I heard from, you know, people in politics, people in the local industry, is like, well, that's not going to last forever. I don't know if they're right. It's still going strong. I would say that Los Angeles and New York is now trying to figure out a way to bring things back out of Atlanta because so much of the industry has moved there. So there is the incentive issue, right? Which I don't know if Tennessee is going to completely get behind it. I know that they've done great things, that they actually, out of all the states, have a robust incentive program that does mean something to producers and to studio execs when they're coming here to film their projects. It's not nothing. It really isn't anything. It's just, it's not what studios are looking at when it comes to their budget. You know, I can't remember exactly what Tennessee's current incentive is. All I know is that there's two factors that are, I believe, still at play. And if I'm over speaking, I apologize. But it's on the in-state spend. It's on who is an actual resident here. You can apply them to the incentive. And I'm an actual incentive. I'm a resident here. You know, 901 is on my number. I got a Tennessee driver's license. But there's a cap on anybody who lives here that doesn't really make it an incentive for anybody to do anything. So, you know, like my fee is only up to a certain amount, and it can't be something that actually looks like it even helps the production because there's this cap. The second thing that I think is a little bit, I get why they're doing it, but it doesn't make sense, is that a lot of the incentives that are allowed to happen in Tennessee can only happen if they see a benefit that's kind of like in place of for their return on investment. When you do an incentive for like a shoe factory, it makes sense to a lot of politicians and a lot of voters because they're like, oh, we're getting that Nike plant. It's going to have this many jobs and it's going to stay here for a minute. But film production isn't like that. We're going to be in town for 4 months at most, maybe that's a lot. And then they're gone. And so then there's this perception of like, well, I don't want to give Sandra Bullock my tax dollars. But what they don't understand is that it's kind of like, well, which would you rather have? Would you rather have a shoe factory here that's just any old shoe, or do you want Nike? Oh, well, I'd want Nike because that means it's going to be successful. Okay, that's why they're hiring Sandra Bullock to be in this movie. So, you know, yes, you might be incentivizing the choices that they made with their cast and they're above the line, but what they're missing out is an entire industry that's been built in Georgia that's about hotels, that's about you know, electricians, that's about not just the crew base that we know, but things that I think voters don't even know about. People have to stay in hotels. There's gasoline, there's materials, there's props, there's costumes, there's hair people that need to be hired locally. And that is the industry that has been created in Atlanta. The second hardest thing that Atlanta also deals with is, do you have local acting talent that can truly fill out all of those roles that weren't cast in larger markets like Los Angeles or New York? And it's been really great because sometimes I'll see like there's an actor that's in my movie Coming to America, and I just saw him in WandaVision. It's like I'm seeing the people that are in Atlanta that get work, but that's kind of a bread and butter thing. I mean, if you don't have the acting base here, and that's what makes me kind of like angry, because like I think Memphis has a really great opportunity because we've got all these theaters here that keep actors, you know, in constant rotation. We actually do have a lot of actors here. I don't know if Nashville has that. I don't know if East Tennessee has that, but they're basically, the short answer is, and I'll get off my high horse with it right now, is Tennessee is completely equidistant. That the reason why FedEx is here is that you can be 3.5 hours from LA, you can be 3 hours to New York. If everybody got together and actually had some vision for this city to be a filmmaking hub, it'd be like ringing a dinner bell. I mean, people would just, the productions would come here if they could find that they could make their movie at the kind of cost that's competitive to the other markets, they would come.
Thank you. That was great. And actually, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of what you were talking about with film is kind of dead on for music here too. It's sort of the same issue about getting people to recognize the talent.
Well, and what's particularly hard about it is that it's kind of like if you see like a great band here locally, right? And they've got their record release party over at Goner, over at Last Chance, and you go to their show and you're listening to their music and you think it's great. And there's a part of you that wants to almost like make them feel better by saying like, man, just be you and do that. But I get why people want there to be a bigger industry here. I get why people would want to tour or to be a part of a bigger production. People want to work, you know, especially all the talented, you know, technicians that we have in town. I mean, people that have worked on huge movies and huge projects. If they had more product here, they'd be able to stay here. But they're probably every year they're wondering, should I move? There's whole towns in Georgia that had nobody living in them. And now they're bursting at the seams with people who've moved there and created their own. And I'm not talking about movie stars. I'm talking about people that work in the industry, you know, the bread and butter of films, you know, grip and electric, cameramen, you know, people who makeup artists, and they've moved there. You know, they live there now, and it's because of the industry there.
So I'm going to go ahead and open it up and let people talk to you, or we're going to read questions, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, so if you're watching on Zoom, please use the Q&A box, not the chat box, use the Q&A box to submit your question. And if you're on YouTube or Eventive, just use the chat boxes there and send your questions in. We do have one that was submitted earlier, which is from Phyllis Johnson. She says, I was blessed to be an extra on Coming to America 2. Every time Craig got the shot, he would yell, Singleton. It was powerful. It gave me chills. I guess this was a way to pay homage to the late John Singleton and the name of the soundstage that we shot in. Craig, how did that all happen?
thank you. And that's really touching that you remember that. Well, as you know, John is very important to me. John not only put up his house for collateral to finance Hustle and Flow, but was really a big brother to me all the way up until the end. And John was the one that knew that I had made my first movie on a handheld video camera, but he was like, I got to show you how to do a set, and he was very patient with me, and he inspired me every day. But then the last Dolomite is my name. I had heard that he wasn't doing so well, that he maybe had a stroke, and I had been in touch with John a bit, and so I pleaded with him to come down to the set, and so he came down, and then on the final screening of Dolomite is my name, I had John come down to watch the movie. And I sat him about three seats away from Eddie. Now, Eddie, you'd think would laugh out loud at Dolomite is my name, but he doesn't. He's very quiet. And John is not. John will be like, he'll be watching a movie, bah, bah, and he'll shout and he'll punch people next to him and laugh. He's the embodiment of like a film lover. And that night, Eddie asked me if I wanted to do Coming to America. So then when John passed away, it got me thinking about John and how he got into the business. And for those of you who don't know, John was a college student, and he wrote Boys in the Hood, and he worked as a security guard on Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Or not Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Pee-wee's Playhouse, and Lawrence Fishburne was, as you remember, the cowboy, and he went into Stephanie Elaine's office at Columbia. Stephanie Elaine, who produced Hustle and Flow and Black Snake Moan with us, and Stephanie's seeing this young skinny kid, South Central kid, coming in, and he had a jacket on in August, and the jacket, he had basically stitched New Deal Productions on the back of his jacket. And she was like, what's New Deal? And he's like, that's my production company. I'm going to be making movies. He just had this swagger already, as a young man. He just knew, I'm going to make that movie. And she's like, okay, well, who do you want to have direct this script you wrote? Who do I want to have direct this script? I'm directing the script. This is my motherfucking story. I'm going to tell the story. He had his essence before he had a career, and that was New Deal. So on a set, when you're done with a scene, I turn to my assistant director and I'm like, we're good. And he gets on the radio. All right, New Deal, New Deal, New Deal. And then everybody knows, okay, we got to move on to the next scene that's on the schedule for that day. So we all got to talking, and I was like, you know what? Whenever you say New Deal, I think of John. I think of like that thing he had stitched into his jacket, which later became his production company. And I worked with a lot. I surround myself with a lot of people who've worked with John. And then we said, wait a minute. Everybody knows what the Abbey is on set. It's the second to the last shot of the day, and it's named after some white guy on a set that did it one time or something like that. It's like there's nothing named after Black people on a set. And so on our movie, we were like, okay, when it's time to move on, when you've got the best scene, I'm going to say Singleton. My AD shouts out Singleton, and then the whole cast and crew went Singleton, and then we'd move on. And it just stayed with us. And I told that story. I told everybody's on the set. Tracy Morgan's like, what? Why is everybody saying Singleton? I told that whole story, and I was passing Tracy, and he was on the phone to his producer. It's like, when I get back to set, when we're moving on, I better hear Singleton. I want to hear New Deal. It became this thing that everybody now wanted to do. And I hope it takes off, because he really was the spirit, not only of filmmaking, but of loving films. And I would say the biggest gift that I got from John was to love movies. So much of our rocket fuel, I think, when we're young, is to kind of hate on movies. I get it. And young men out there and young women, I want you to still going like, man, that movie sucked. I could do better than that. That's your rocket fuel to get you into it. But at a certain point, you're gonna realize that it's hard. And that I'd go to see a movie that I was like, I don't know if I like that. And John goes, what do you mean, man? That was a great afternoon. It was a good 2 hours. What are you talking about? That was fun. You didn't think it kind of like lost its place like at the end? Oh man, shut up. Man, that was fun. That was good. That was a good movie. And it's like, he's right. He's right. There's something really in everything that John found he could love. And the only reason that I wasn't doing it is because I was just a young, pissed off filmmaker. And now I'm older and I'm thinking about how much time that John had on this planet. And I need to be more like John, and I need to love a little bit more and stop bringing all this negative rocket fuel that I don't need anymore. So thank you for bringing that up. Sorry if I'm getting a little emotional.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got a few questions that are kind of like piggybacking off of Justin's last question, but I'll go with this one from Rachel. Going off the previous responses, how do we, local Memphians and filmmakers, help to put Memphis on the map to become more like Atlanta has?
That's kind of the $1 million question, I know. And I wish I had a good answer for you that didn't involve, senators and representatives and business owners all coming together. Let me try to speak to something that I think would do better than that. When Hustle and Flow won the audience award at Sundance, Ira Sachs won for his Memphis film, 50 Shades of Blue.
40 Shades of Blue, yeah.
40 Shades. It's 50 Shades of Gray, 40 Shades of Blue. I always get those two mixed up. But his movie was made for like about under like $1 million, maybe under. And then my movie was made for $2 million. Now it's a lot easier and there's a lot better tools now for independent filmmakers to make their movie that wasn't there before. Since the industry is going through a massive change in the next 10 years, I feel, especially with what COVID kind of advanced in terms of how we watch movies. And I'm talking to you as somebody who you will be able to watch my movie that's like an enormous like studio, title on your phone this Friday. Like the industry's changing. I mean, I went into my daughter's room the other day and she was watching a movie on Netflix on her phone. She's got a big ass TV right there, but she's watching on her phone. And I'm like, how'd you find out about this movie? She said, TikTok. I was like, and what's TikTok? It's changing in ways that people that are in the industry doesn't even know. What could really rock everybody is what I think has been happening, which is, can there be a real movement of Memphis filmmakers? Young people who are being like really daring with their truth and with their honesty in their movies. You don't need a lot of money for that. And I know that people, the one problem you're always going to have when you come at me sometimes on, in out in public, when people will be like, yeah, but I need that money. I need the money to do this. It's like, well, my best film was made for nothing, if you ask me. And that opened doors. But imagine what could really happen if like a real movement of like so many Memphis filmmakers started making films and didn't necessarily care about Atlanta, and even, dare we say, didn't necessarily care about Hollywood either. I know that that's not going to put food on the table necessarily, but I think we've got a better chance at doing that than anywhere else in the state.
Okay, great. I've got a question from our most recent audience award winner for Best Hometowner Feature, Anwar Jameson. Anwar asks, do you have any suggestions for marketing movies after they're released in addition to traditional ads and social media?
Another $1 million question. I'll tell you I'll tell you something that I would like to speak to though, along those lines, and then I'll try to help out as best I can, is that I do find that, because I've been in it a few different ways with when you've got a movie that's like out there on the festival circuit. And I've experienced like the dream, you know, of like you go to Sundance and there's a bidding war and then your movie gets picked up and wins Oscars and all that shit. And it's amazing. Don't get me wrong. But I've also been to festivals before that where you start playing your movie everywhere. You're sending it to people that want to see it and you kind of can't let it go. There's that difficult place in your trajectory with your film where you still want to keep giving to it. And sometimes some awful truth that I've had to kind of tell some people is that like, hey, your movie did what it needed to do. You know, most of all, it did something for you. It's time to just let it go and let it live in some place. Don't try to like recoup money from it. You know, try to think of the money spent on it or the effort spent on it in a different way. I know that's not exactly what you're asking, but I've noticed that that's something that a lot of people don't sometimes talk about, is when is it time to like let that movie go and say like, okay, I don't think it's really gonna do anything more right now than what it's done. I'm a big believer in very quickly trying to get into another project as soon as possible. Because you've learned so much and it's just going to go to waste unless you put it into something else. In terms of marketing, I mean, it's really tricky because, like, for instance, like I heard this number that it doesn't matter. Let's say your movie costs $2 million to make. Let's say your movie costs $1 million. Let's say your movie costs $35,000 to make, like Paranormal Activity did. In order for you, a normal audience member, to know that a $35,000 good movie exists, it's going to take at least $25 million to make sure you are aware of something, not even that you want to particularly see it. And all of that is beginning to change, right? So, for instance, when you have a theatrical movie that a major studio is putting out and they know that a majority of their economics is going to be based on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of its opening weekend, yes, there's going to be, you know, they would love for there to be multiples and for there to be profit on all of those. But really, so much of that opening weekend is important to studios because, and I didn't know this actually until recently, there's other ancillary deals that are predicated on that opening weekend. So like when you see something on HBO that's like a movie from like another studio, they bought or licensed that movie on a scale that is based off of its opening weekend grosses. So the whole industry has been geared towards selling a movie for a weekend. So I think it's 60, I think it's 70, but 70% of studios' marketing dollars for a movie gets dropped the week before a movie opens. 70% of their total marketing budget, because they're trying to get you to go this Friday, you know, tonight, this weekend, the big, like, they've got to get you there. Streaming services spend just as much of their marketing dollars the week after it opens. Because, and we've probably all been a part of this. We've probably all been like, it's Christmas, we're hanging out, you're on your phone, you're on like, what is this bird box everybody keeps talking about? What is this? What is this? Oh, I can watch it now. Oh, all right. Oh, wait, I can watch it on the very phone that I'm reading about it on. So the streaming mentality is a little different than the theatrical mentality. But if you ask me, the streaming mentality is closer to kind of an indie way of doing things. So you're not trying to dump all your money into one place to say, damn it, you better see it on this day. You're just trying to drive traffic to something that is already accessible to people and already there for people to consume. Influencers could be a part of that. Having an artist kind of like, maybe if somebody here made a movie, and then let's say I'm going to pitch a movie right now. Let's say we're doing like a Jukin movie meets Hustle and Flow type of thing. You can go to like Yo Gotti or something like that. You can go to somebody and say like, hey man, I'll give you like a percentage of the ownership. It's like Shark Tank. All right, I'll give you a royalty. I'll give you some equity in whatever it makes, but can you tweet it out like here and just do this and drive people to this place? I feel that now the way that the streaming services are going to go is that like a YouTube model is going to meet a Netflix model, and it's going to be a little bit more of like less through the portal of like of tastemakers, like at a Netflix where everything can be on there. Everything can, not absolutely everything, but there's other projects can rise, and that's going to be a whole different way to market it.
Great. I like this question from Burchard here. It says, with the advent of new technologies when it comes to set design, do you think location holds the same importance in filmmaking as it once did?
I had this question today, this conversation with a major studio that wants me to do something. And we were talking about actor availability to go to a location overseas. I was like, I don't know if we'll be able to move everybody over there to do that. I don't think can we just do kind of like what Lucasfilm is doing? Can we have the big the big Mandalorian set where you're changing things with like a button? And there's a long pause, and like this is a good producer, and he's like, no man, you got to feel the sweat of this movie. It's got to be real. It's got to be palpable. It's got to be real. So locations are important. That being said, I just shot Zamunda. I just shot Africa in Atlanta. And sometimes I was on a set with a green screen in the background, and you can move it around. I am a very big believer in location as part of the character of the movie. Obviously Coming to America wasn't that, but Dolomite Is My Name definitely was. It was my first LA movie. I've never done a movie in LA. I've never done like a Los Angeles movie, and it needed to be filmed there. So, location is very important, but that's where it sometimes gets difficult. Sometimes people, it's expensive to travel people, and sometimes you can, there's a couple of scenes that take place in Queens that we shot and that take place at around Madison Square Garden that we shot in Atlanta. And we have my producer, Kevin Mishner, is from Queens. And I remember him driving down to this location, and there's just no way in hell that this place is going to pass for Madison Square Garden. He got out of the car and he was like, oh, well, wait a minute. What? No, I take that back. If we just shoot here and here and here, and then suddenly we could do it. And so it's always a little bit of I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's definitely a give and take.
Okay. It's kind of a long question from Alex here, but I think it's important because it kind of goes back to post-production and the pandemic conversation we were having earlier. Going back to post-production in the pandemic, I know you said it felt like a good learning experience to step back and let things happen because you literally couldn't be present moment to moment. But in working in post during the pandemic, I find myself really missing a lot of communication that happens naturally and feeling like a lot slips through the cracks. I've also seen more and more production companies saying things like, we're just going to work like this now, even after the pandemic.
Yep.
Now that you've been through this process at a high level, both in and out of the pandemic, do you feel like our potentially remote future is something to embrace, or are we losing something important? And are you itching to get back to the human-to-human connection in your process?
Yeah, all that's, I totally know what you're talking about in terms of that person-to-person human connection that happens, especially in post. There's nothing, look, I've confessed more deep secrets to my editor than I have like to family. You know, that's a very special relationship, and it will continue to be a special relationship. I'll tell you where editorial is comparable to another industry that is also facing the same question, which is a writer's room. Okay. So like on Empire, you would go into a writer's room, you have like 10 to 12 people in a room, and you're trying to do what's called a blue sky. Let's blue sky season 5, which is like, okay, well, what's season 5 gonna, what trouble is Lucius and Cookie gonna get into in season 5? And you start throwing ideas up onto the board, and it's like, hey man, I was watching Scarface the other day. You know that scene where it's like, oh, I know what you're talking about. Wait, you haven't seen Scarface? Yeah, this. Oh, wait a minute. You're talking about the old black and white Scarface? No, I'm talking about the Scarface, and you get into these conversations that suddenly create content, right? That has been completely shredded during this pandemic, and now everybody's doing their writer's room by way of Zoom. And so you start getting into ideas of like, well, how do you have that conversational thing? But a lot of writers that I know have talked about how they to some extent have preferred a lot of it, because so much of what they have to do is they get up in the morning, they drive an hour into work, they sit in a room. Depending on the writer's room, some writer's room aren't like this, but sometimes you bullshit for an hour on like TV shows and movies that you're excited about. And then you're probably the only writing that you do before lunch is like writing down what you want for lunch, on the lunch order. And then by the end of the day, you start getting into real substantive conversations. And then at a certain point, you've got to go to a desk and write, and then you've got to get back into traffic for about an hour before you get home. I wouldn't be surprised if what starts happening with some of these networks is that they go like, well, wait a minute, we spend this much money on making sure that writers have offices and conference rooms and all that kind of stuff. What if we just bought out a restaurant for like one day? And then the rest of it, everybody can be where they want. If they want to be at the beach, or if they want to be like at their kid's house, or if they want to be at home, they could do something like that. So it got me thinking. We were having this conversation about this, and I was like, well, I wonder what editorial is going to be like, because that's that close relationship that you're talking about, and needing to be able to have that kind of human interaction. I get it, I really do. But my editor's in Los Angeles, my kids are here in Memphis, and my life is here in Memphis. And unlike my editor, and all love to editors, unlike my editor didn't spend 3 months in prep on location in Atlanta and 3 months shooting in Atlanta. And now I've got to go to Los Angeles, where I don't really live, and spend 5 months there in editorial. It'd be nice if there was a middle ground. And that's something that I experienced on this, where I spent a good 2 months with my editor, and we had that relationship. Then the pandemic hit, and then I was like doing it by way of Zoom, and I could be with my family, and also he could be with his. He wasn't having to drive over to Paramount and do that back and forth. So I think it's going to be finding the place that everybody's kind of comfortable with.
We have a question from our YouTube stream. You've often directed projects with strong Black themes. Could you talk about the challenges of that as a non-Black director?
It's interesting, because there really hasn't been, in my mind, a challenge that is larger than making sure that the people around me agree with what we're making. It's like I remember very, very clearly, like John and Stephanie and Dwight Williams, who also produced Hustle and Flow. They were very big. This is a while ago. This is like in 2004, where they were like, we're giving you like the opportunity of a lifetime, and here's how you're going to pay it back. You're going to make sure that your crews have a lot of African-American crew members on them, because there's a problem in Hollywood where they're not getting hired. And I have always made a point, even in local productions that I do, of trying to broaden the crew base. And whereas some people view that as a box to check, I never view it that way. I'm always like, how else are you going to know what people are going to be responding to with the material that you've got? The best way, and I got to be honest, like I hadn't really thought of me directing movies that had predominantly African-American casts as a problem until recently, because there is a strong and noble and understandable push for there to be more African-American and more African-American women in places of power in Hollywood and directing and producing. And something we never talk about is really in the executive level, there needs to be that, and there should be that. But it wasn't until recently that I started going like, well, should I be directing Dolomite is my name? And, should I be doing Coming to America? And I think that what that doubt sometimes will bring up in me is say like, okay, don't get defensive. Find some purpose in the question, right? And for me, I remember after, first and foremost, like I brought them more so with Eddie, like I brought it up to him. And I don't think anybody wants to know this, that's really part of the struggle, but like Eddie's like, I don't want to hear that. Like, I want you, I like your, Dolomite is about a filmmaker from the South who put a ragtag group of people together to make a movie for no money and started a career in Hollywood. Do you know anybody that's done that? I'm like, I get it. Okay. That's kind of like what I've done here. And that's why I'm passionate about it. But he's Rudy Ray Moore, and I understand why there would be questions or caution, or as you put, like challenges. So on Coming to America, I had a, other than Kenya Barris, I had a white producer or two on the movie, and we were always bring up this question. And I was like, I need, I don't know how to say this, y'all, but I need more Black people on this crew. Like we need, we're here in Atlanta, we're making Coming to America, and this has to be, this is the movie for that. And there was the conversation like, well, how do white people basically work in all Black movies and feel like they're part of the solution than part of the problem? And I was like, well, I'll tell you how you do it. You first of all, you listen, and you arm your artists and give them everything they can. So when I'm over here with my producers and they're saying like, oh, maybe we shouldn't give this much time to Fatima Robinson, who's my who's our amazing choreographer, who's done numerous films and brilliant work, African-American woman, she needs another day. Get her the other day. Ruth needs more support for these costumes. They're amazing costumes. She's an artist. Give her what she needs. Provide an environment for everybody around you where everybody can feel safe to be what they want to be. So when sometimes people go like, well, what's the deal? And by the way, I've had that throughout my whole career where people have literally said, and it's a weird place for me to be, because it has the tinge of racism where people go like, what is it with Craig and all these Black movies? I just hate that. I understand what they're asking. It just felt disrespectful to, I think, to just put it in this category of like, what is he doing with that? But I've tried to get a Charlie Pride movie going. I'm still trying to get a Charlie Pride movie going. I'm attracted to a lot of characters that I've been trying to get a Stax show for forever. I can't help it. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. It's right there. I can't help it. Charlie Pride met his wife at the Gay Hawk on Danny Thomas Boulevard. But I also understand why there is this question of like, should somebody do this? I would just say, as someone who knows a lot of African-American filmmakers, men and women, that I think it's also important to not get too bogged down into categories, because I wouldn't want to put Malcolm Lee, I wouldn't want to put Senna Hamry, I wouldn't want to put Mario Van Peebles, I wouldn't want to put any of these kind of directors that I know in a box and say that this is the kind of movie that they should do. I do understand why there is a question about it. All I can say is that I love what I love, and I try to listen, and I try to learn, and if people tell me I'm doing something wrong, I definitely will listen to it and suffer with it and try to think like, am I doing the right thing?
Great. Thank you for the answer. Austin Webster, just piggybacking off of part of what you were speaking to. Austin Webster asks, how did it feel to be tapped by Eddie Murphy to direct Coming to America immediately right after your work with him and Wesley Snipes on Dolomite?
Terrifying. It was really scary. It's Coming to America, man. It's Star Wars, man. I mean, it's that big of a deal. It's that big of a deal, you know? I mean, especially for me and especially for a whole lot of people. But the pride in my life is that Eddie and Wesley both feel really comfortable working with me. And that I love their artistry. And I love it when people go, artistry? They're just being funny, or they're just being stars. That's not true. Yes, they're funny, and yes, they're stars, but they're working. You know, they're working with a craft that they've been honing for decades, and they've got a process. And I'm there to work for them. You know, I'm there to make sure they get what they want. I mean, let me tell you, to sit on an apple box 2 feet away from James Earl Jones and have to tell him what needs to be done. You're not going to tell James Earl Jones how to do something. You're going to say, Mr. Jones, what do you require? And I'm going to make it happen. Otherwise, I'm here to make some suggestions here and there. Otherwise, I want to get out of their way. Otherwise, I want to get things out of their way. You know, Wesley and I had this conversation. He would say, am I going over the top too much? And I was like, man, there's this great conversation that Steven Spielberg had with Stanley Kubrick. I don't know if any of you know about this, where Stanley Kubrick basically invited Spielberg to watch The Shining, and Steven didn't like it, and then had to have dinner with Kubrick after he watched The Shining and didn't like it. He loves it now, but he didn't quite like it. And Kubrick was like, well, what was your problem with the movie? And he was like, oh, it's just that, you know, Nicholson is so like over the top and so big in places. He's kind of like kabuki theater. And Kubrick goes, name me your favorite actors of all time. And Spielberg went like, oh, like, you know, Jimmy Stewart or Spencer Tracy. And Kubrick went, where's Cagney? Where's James Cagney on your list? And it wasn't on Spielberg's list. And Kubrick went into this long conversation about like how Cagney is one of his favorite artists. Now, if you look at Cagney and you look at Kubrick's movies, you can kind of see that connection, because Cagney's like, flames are behind him, you know, and he's like, top of the world, ma! And you're like, he is just so himself and so bold with his choices that it transcends the movie, and it becomes something that they play in movie reels. And I told that whole story to Wesley, you know, and he's like, you know, you could just tell me I was doing fine, Craig, you know. And I was like, no, I got to tell you about this whole story about Spielberg and Kubrick and Cagney. He goes, I get it. I go, Wesley, you're my Cagney. You go as far as you want to go. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. That's my little sign. And what this sign is for everybody, this is what I get paid the big bucks for, is doing this. And all this means is take a little bit of butter off the toast.
Nice.
Toast is good. Just a little bit of butter off the toast, and we'll see if that's a good take. That's otherwise I like, you know, and Eddie will, they both take direction, you know. But yeah, I mean, I'm sitting there with Eddie Murphy and Wesley Snipes on one of my favorite movies. You can't help it. Every once in a while, I always allow myself a lot of fear when I eat my breakfast burrito in the morning. When I show up at set and they hand me my breakfast burrito, I go, guys, just give me a second. I'm just going to down this. And I'm sitting there just eating this burrito, and I'm just terrified about the day and all the people and the egos and everybody that I got to navigate through. And will I do a good job? But I just let all that fear and I just eat it. I eat it with the eggs and the bacon and the salsa. And then it's like, I'm done. I look at my fingers, I wipe my hands with a napkin, and then I just forget about it. And then I have to go to it. So that's all you can do with those kind of stars, you know? Hope
awesome.
that answered your question.
No, yeah, that was great. There's a few more questions, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to get to A.D. Smith's question here. He says, I'm a Black filmmaker here in Memphis. I just completed my first indie feature. The budget was around $35K, like you mentioned, LOL. Instead of only worrying about recouping my budget and entering film festivals, I'm thinking of using it as a calling card to reach out to producers of influence and executive producers of your caliber. Do you think this is a good idea?
You've saved yourself so much problems by just mentally going there. I can't say enough how so many people think that that movie that they made has to blow up. When I made The Poor and Hungry, I remember going to we were invited to the Hollywood Film Festival, and I'd never been to a film festival before. And everybody that was there with me was saying, like, what's your goal? Do you want to sell it to maybe be on like IFC, which was back then, well, I guess IFC is still a thing, the Independent Film Channel. Do you want to try to sell it to HBO? Do you want to try to get a theatrical run? Like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I want to do nothing else with this movie than get an agent to read my next script. That's all I want with this movie. That movie script at the time was called Hook, Hustle, and Flow. It had hook in front of it. And that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted that movie to be for me, is just something that if they read this, they would see the movie or they'd see a trailer, they go like, okay, obviously this person put tremendous effort into something and they made something. And then they could watch it if they felt, maybe this guy's got something else in him. Because I can't explain to you all how much really Hollywood is about them not wanting to do what you're bringing to them right then and there. And let me tell you, Hustle and Flow was something where like it went all over Hollywood. Nobody wanted to make it. Nobody wanted to make it. Everybody loved it. Everybody loved Hustle and Flow. They didn't want to make it. But I got jobs off of that. I got jobs off of like, you got to remember those execs and various producers, they're in these meetings, they've got these different ideas, and they're like, maybe we got this, we got that idea, we got that property. Oh, you know what? Who's that kid that came in here the other day with that one movie and he had that script? It was a good script. I mean, we liked it, but we're not going to make it. But would he be good or would she be good for that? That's what you want to get. If you can crack that, that's something special. No one ever thinks to do that. No one ever thinks that because they're thinking that everything about this movie that they just put all their money and all their attention and years of their life into this one thing is somehow going to be the rocket that gets them into that. And it's just not. You want to figure out a way just to open a door. And then I would recommend that the scarier thing that you need to address right now, and you probably hats off to you for the movie that you've made. And I know it's an effort, and I'm sure you've done a fantastic job with it. You got to have like 3 other scripts ready to go. That's the reality nobody wants to really deal with. Like people always ask me about Black Snake Moan, like, how did you get that movie going? And I tell people, it's like, I wrote Black Snake Moan because I couldn't get Hustle and Flow going. And I thought that I could at least make Black Snake Moan on my video camera out in, Rossville, Tennessee, where my grandmother's, place was. I could probably just do this, find some blues artist here in town, and find an actress and do it really cheap. So I wrote another script called Devil Music about Elvis Presley at the crossroads with B.B. King and Ike Turner and Howlin' Wolf. And it was the whole like fighting the devil at the crossroads and everything. And then I wrote another script as well that later became Maggie Lynn, which is still a script that's out there. But I'd written like 3 scripts before Hustle and Flow even got made. So you got to remember that Hustle and Flow, the script, along with the VHS tape screener of The Poor and Hungry, which was, you made yours for 35. I made mine for like about 25 back in the day though. That was the thing that I tried to wedge into the door to try to get into. For you to have that kind of perspective, you're light years ahead of everybody else.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of people are kind of curious about what you've got coming up next, but I know you kind of touched on that already, unless there's something else that you didn't speak to that you do want to shout out or anything. But
what I'm doing next, other than what Joey and Justin and I were talking about, which is, I got to lose some of this pandemic weight. That's the first thing I'm going to be doing, is trying to get some of these pounds off me that I've been doing, sitting on my butt watching Kurosawa movies and eating ice cream. But I'm writing a script right now, and this will give you a nice little button. I can't say everything about it, but I can give you all a nice little bit of a coup right now. A movie played at Indie Memphis years ago, and I fell in love with the movie, and it's a documentary, and now I'm writing a script about it. And my hope is to maybe make it this year. And then another script that I wrote 9 years ago, just to kind of give you all a little bit of like some context. Like, sometimes you're going to be writing a lot of things in this business and it doesn't go, but now there's a lot of interest in it. And so, we're all trying to figure out what the pandemic will bear. Like what can we make in a pandemic world? And it's not as easy as y'all think right now. I mean, even just doing crowd scenes is like, I don't know how we even do a scene with more than 200 people. So I've got like 3 projects that I'm kind of moving up the field, and then I'll decide like in March what my old manager would say, what the marketplace will bear, and we'll decide. The marketplace will decide what I'll be able to make at that moment.
Nice. Now I'm really curious. I'm going to go back through all the old programs of Indie Memphis over the years and see if I can figure out what dodocumentary or.
So if I didn't live in Memphis, Tennessee, and go to Indie Memphis like that, then I wouldn't have had a paycheck over this pandemic. I'll tell you that, because I'm writing the script right now.
Well, thank you, Craig. Really appreciate you taking the time and talking to the film community here. I mean, it means
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I know that there's a lot of artists out there that are trying to get through this time, and if there's some dread, if there's some stress, my therapist says find some purpose in the dread. And I would just recommend you all try to find some purpose right now. I know you have it, but just try to hold to it.
Yeah, could not agree more. Well, thank you, Craig, and we're all going to be rooting for you this week, and we'll be tuning in on Friday when the movie releases.
Get together with your mom and grandmom and everybody that loved my grandmother loved Coming to America. She loved that, and then she would lean in very quietly and say, like, don't tell anybody my other favorite movie is Dirty Dancing.
That's the one that she's ashamed of. I like
That's the one she didn't want anybody to know about that.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. And thank you all of everybody that attended and asked questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everything, but hopefully you all had a great experience, and stay tuned soon. We'll be announcing our next shoot and splice coming up. And thank you again, Craig, and thank you, Justin, for moderating. Everybody have a great night.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig.